Finally, the flaw realization of the flaw of natural sciences. Yes, it's Tiphereth's turn to deal with some issues. Just not with the person you're thinking of. Not this time, anyway. Roland walked onto the floor of natural sciences and noticed Tiphereth. She was silent and not paying much attention to him. He then asked if she was lost in thought and wanted to know what she was pondering about. Apparently, she used to think that her existence was meaningless. She had no expectations with her life, just obligations. Obligations to live the life given to her. Well, considering that she was from the outskirts, a place that not many are capable of surviving in, as in where those considered unacceptable to even the back streets of the city are left to rot, or rust, depending on what you are. That's not unreasonable to believe. Roland asked if that's changed now. According to Tiphereth, they have. This was due to Enoch. He saw the distant light, which, when she was Lisa, she didn't understand how he could see that before. Well, she can now. Expectations gave both of them the strength to push through hardship. Roland asked what they were. What they were was, they could trust things to become better tomorrow, like, life holding possibilities and significance that could make the world a better place. Tiphereth, you do know who you're talking to, right? He's a washed-up fixer that got demoted and now has nothing left to lose. If you're looking for optimism, you're better off talking to a sentient pile of and no, not the one in front of you. I'm talking literally here. Roland proved me right, as he considered it too much optimism for him. According to Tiphereth, natural science is a field of study born out of the urge to understand the inner workings of the world. Pure curiosity. Another way of putting it is the identifying, forecasting, and understanding of the natural world. In this case, the unfairness that was a part of that world, due to people being unable to understand it. It involved illuminating the world with knowledge, while most were still in shadow. A few made that light, and even then, they couldn't see all of the laws of nature. Most preferred darkness, as they just wanted results without understanding the process. Well, Yesod put it in a similar way to that. Roland at that point believed that they, as in the librarians, were right about the world going to hell. He understood that most preferred to close their eyes rather than try to understand, due to them failing miserably. He believed that the world would be fine without him in it. Tiphereth didn't believe that. She didn't believe that his eyes should remain shut forever. She didn't consider it to be the humanity that she knew, that humans constantly try to understand and move towards light. She's sure that he's no different. Tiphereth, who are you talking about? Have you not been following what's happened so far? Of course, Roland didn't give a and told her to shut the up about forcing her generalizations on him. Darkness is all he sees. There's no light around him. Tiphereth didn't believe that, even if it doesn't seem to be there. And he might think that it's too dark to see anything. But it is there. There's not just one kind of light. He just needs the insight to see the other lights and not curl up in the darkness like he's cowering from something that he's powerless to deal with. Although it's up to him. He sees himself as too worn out to do this. In fact, he's never seen any light throughout his life. So even if he did move forward, he's got nothing left, and there's nothing he wanted. As for expectations, those are for optimists, and those are virtually non-existent in that city as far as he's concerned. Tiphereth didn't believe that. She believed that he had expectations, that he's just in denial and refused to admit it. They saw a flashback of the recent past, where we see Roland in his life as a grade 9 fixer after his demotion. He saw himself as an empty husk as he returned to his home, covered in the blood of strangers. A home with musty air and low light, which was large for one person. It was clear that there were signs that his wife was pregnant when she died. Well, a sign anyway, as there was a baby mobile in that home. It was musty due to him not maintaining it for some time. His mind becoming empty and lonely. He lay on the sofa and stared at the ceiling. He couldn't even be bothered to clear up the beer cans and cigarettes. Wait, didn't he quit them? Or was this something left over from just before his wife died? Well, as for the beer, we know they still drinks booze, based on how he responded to his most recent drinking buddy. As he lay there, he could hear the droplets of water falling from the kitchen tap onto the sink. He could hear laughter from his neighbours. He didn't have any interest in joining in the fun. This was the room of a man that had no expectations. He left it to decay after the pianist incident. He fell asleep without hope. That room had a single black lump. Well, he wasn't wrong about that. Then he was visited by a woman who knew him as the kid with a pitch-black heart. And it turned out that it wasn't a job that the blood came from. It was just him picking a fight in order to vent his anger at those unfortunate enough to meet him. He was resting from that. She had an offer for him that she believed that he couldn't refuse, and ask if he'd want to listen to it. What was this deal? Who was this woman? How did this lead to the library? The answers exist, just not in this flashback. Back in the present, Roland was resentful towards Tiphereth for talking to him like she knows all about people, She isn't even a real human. Tiphereth does so because she knows and sees it, the struggles of humans who felt pure agony in order to brighten the world, to reach out for the light. Roland more or less said, "Where the have you been? Which humans have you been looking at?" He believed that people weren't as strong as she thought. He saw them as just lumps, and she was just a copy of one. He saw no meaning anywhere. He saw hopes as empty dreams. Expectations wouldn't get her anywhere. It was at this point that he wielded the Egio of the Queen of Hatred, just as Angela appeared to check on their progress. Angela, no sooner had your back turned, Roland lost it, his mind resonating with the library. His emotions amplified from interactions with Tiphereth, the patron librarian of that floor, as they were discussing the subject of that floor. He was ruffled by small things and snapped. At least, that was what she suspected. Angela could speak from personal experience with that, as, well, she had the more disorderly sides of herself exposed a few times. She trusts Tiphereth to handle this. Tiphereth noted that Angela was enjoying this. Well, she was to an extent, as it wasn't just her that was losing it and embarrassing themselves. Yeah. It's now Roland that has a group therapy session. Or another way of putting it is, it's time for Tiphereth to kick his yeah, about time. Based on the story of the Servant of Wrath, I don't think it was just her that lost her mind after the Hermit of the Azure Forest destroyed their world. It was the other three as well. The battle that was a result of that made them what they were when they were first seen in the Bosmy Corporation. As for what the magical girl's ritual would create, that would be revealed in this. As for the abnormalities of this floor, they're based around negative emotional states, specifically that which was common to the people of the city. As common as firearms are in the US state of Texas, which can be as destructive. They also represent how Roland's ideals were destroyed when he lost everything that mattered to him, such as his wife, for example. He also had no desire to continue. As for how Roland and Tiphereth dealt with this, while both saw it as pointless to wish in that city, a wretched hive of filth and moral decay. Well, I can't use the other description, as that's taken by Star Wars. They both had someone to give their lives meaning. Lisa had Enoch, while Roland had his wife. Both led to something significant happening. It was a change, although I'm not sure if it was good or bad. Well, not in Lisa's case, as it led her to becoming Tiphereth, a brain in a robot's body, and then a replacement fleshy body that had reached puberty. And that was after overcoming her trauma while a brain in a robot body. While she had hope, Roland couldn't seem to hold on to it after he lost his wife. Yeah. And as stated earlier, the male Tiphereth that used to be Enoch, he's staying dead. And the female Tiphereth got over it. Roland, on the other hand, couldn't get over losing his wife. Okay, let's focus on the first EGO that Roland was wielding. The EGO of the Queen of Hatred. The one known as In the Name of Love and Hate. This abnormality represents his feeling of hysteria and desire for violence, as in acting out of control and desiring to pick a fight, not necessarily because he was hired by someone to do so. He just felt like doing that, which was what he did in that flashback. Thankfully, this came in the form of a suit that loosely resembled her mini kaiju form, as... Can you imagine what he'd look like if he wore the EGO suit from Lobotomy Corporation? Even he doesn't deserve that kind of humiliation. And that goes at least double for Angela. That would not be a good look for her. Not at all. As for his behaviour while wielding this, he once believed that happiness was in his future. That's the day that he saw as never coming back. Although he wondered if he broke everything. And questioned if he could go back to that time. Well, regardless, he felt like unleashing his power on the ones standing before him, the librarians of the floor of natural sciences. He questioned his reason for existing when there was no one with him, nothing for him to look forward to. He understood that he couldn't have what he wanted easily in that world, where peace was an impossible dream. Something so right, yet unobtainable. He felt like he failed to keep the one that truly mattered safe. And he just couldn't be bothered to look for any lights, the lights that he couldn't see. Tiphereth didn't know everything about Roland and didn't understand him fully, but she knew that they've got work to do, and they've still got to fight him head on, if he's to go back to normal. As for her assistants, they understood that they knew too little, but they had to do something. That Roland turned into that. And it wasn't just Angela that was affected. Upon defeating his first EGO form, he changed into the EGO of the Servant of Wrath, known as Blind Rage. This one represented his regrets, specifically the regret that he was unable to protect his wife, and how that was crushing to him, ever since that day. The regrets might also apply to the family that he would never have with her, as their unborn child was killed along with her during the pianist incident. While his second EGO form was in play, he mentioned that his relationship with his wife was more special than any other, which ended so tragically. He believed that he should have adhered to his principles, well, when he had them, and treated everyone equally. That he believed that it might have prevented his wife from dying. His world was shattered after that. He needed her as she needed him. He broke down because of one that he loved dearly. He couldn't see past the next immediate action. He believed that she shouldn't have come into his world. Not sure what to say about that. Tiphereth, by this point, was experiencing difficulty, but she told her assistants to not worry about her and focus on taking Roland down. Her assistants were looking out for Tiphereth and each other, questioning if they can take Roland down. After tricking Roland into taking down the hermit of the Alciora forest, he shifted into a sword sharpened by tears, the Aegir of the Night of Despair, which represented Roland's despair, the despair for losing his wife after the pianist incident. He felt no meaning in his life after that. Roland in this form felt no tenacity, yet he couldn't let go of his emotional baggage. His heart felt empty, so that he didn't experience loss again. He only felt darkness, something that he felt his whole life. He didn't want to wake up. He wanted to rest in peace. He thought that his wife would stay with him. He was unable to save a thing. Expectations he saw as only what would betray him. Despair was all that was left. Endless despair. He swore to protect his wife, and he failed even that. Tiphereth noticed that he felt hopeless. Words couldn't describe what he felt, and she couldn't think of any words to describe that either. Her assistants noticed the poison, which was the guilt that was eating away at him. Well, regardless of where the culpability lies, they haven't experienced it, so they wouldn't get it completely. The feeling of loss due to what they wanted to protect, dying. Yeah, hard to comprehend what you haven't felt. After he was skewered by the swords, like the abnormality that the Aegir was derived from, he changed to Gold Rush, the Aegir of the King of Greed. And thankfully, he was dressed in a gender-swapped version of that magical girl's outfit. Now, this Aegir is something that's quite familiar to Gebura, as that's what she wielded when she lost it. This one represented Roland's obsession, an obsession with his feelings, his desire for what could give his life meaning, a desire that would never be satisfied, no matter how much he'd want it. In this form, he felt like he was unworthy of even small bits of happiness, unable to follow his own pursuit of happiness. What little hope that he once had was gone, so he can't feel where that happiness would go, asking why he took that loss. along with so many others. He wanted to eat up everything if he couldn't have happiness or hope, and he felt that he was naive to wish for happiness, questioning if it was wrong to behave in that way. Tiphereth pitied Roland as his pleasure was taken away. It didn't matter how small that was. His assistants asked if it was blissful to live a peaceful life in that city. Well, it would be if it was possible. They pitied him for being denied even the smallest amount of hope and happiness, although they believed that while it might be weakened, it wouldn't disappear for good. I don't share their optimism. Upon the gold rush not being enough to punch through the natural science team, Roland utilized the Nihil EGO, the EGO of the Jester of Nihil. Now this one is new. It was planned to be in the Lobotomy Corporation, but it was never implemented. The Jester of Nihil was said to have succumbed to its desires, like the magical girls. I suspect that it either came to be when the magical girls fused together, or it had walked the paths of the magical girls and became an amalgamation of their desires. I suspect it's a combination of the two, as the magical girls in Wonderlab were performing a ritual, which they weren't able to complete due to the Servant of Wrath not being there. If the Servant of Wrath was there, they'd be able to pour their negative desires into one place. And those negative desires would form the Jester of Nihil. Yeah. That sounds like it would have been an additional big event, like with 2 other groups of abnormalities. Well, one group of abnormalities and one that needs a specific condition. This abnormality represented Roland's nihilistic feelings, where he felt that he had nothing left. Nothing had meaning. After the death of his wife, his career was about as dead as she was. He also felt that he had nothing worth living for. Roland, in this form, considered what would happen if he took a step, not knowing if there was a cliff ahead. He saw it as a futile effort to earn back the scenery that he'd lost. But there's no point in dealing with the agony that he doesn't know how to deal with. That he should just live in the moment, where nothing guided him. He didn't know, or even want to know, what's ahead. Carnal desires and jealousy of others led him to fall off that metaphorical cliff, not caring where he ended up, seeing himself as a joke, a foolish man. And considering what we know about him so far, I can't really argue with him about that. Even though the natural sciences team, by this point, was narrowly... Oh, who am I kidding? They were badly beaten. Tiphereth told her assistant librarians that she believed that they could do it. Her assistants were not so sure what to do, knowing that there were boundaries that they had yet to overcome, that there were abnormalities that they didn't get a chance to see or deal with, especially as that clown wasn't on file. The Jester of Nihil's stage was a black and white cave-like building with 4 holes in the background. Heart, spade, diamond, and club. The suits needed for 5 of a kind, each etched into the background. 5, you may ask, but there's only 4. Well, there's a reason for that. Now, this is also the completion of the Royal Flush poker hand. Let's see, the King of Greed being the king, the Queen of Hatred being the queen, the Knight of Despair being the jack. As for the Servant of Wrath, that's either the ace or the 10. With the card, that's what the servant isn't, being the Jester of Nihil. And that card, of course, being the Joker. A wild card that can be whatever is needed at the time. In this battle, the other 4 magical girls were like stone, and the librarians needed to free them in order to stand any chance of beating Roland down. Once they did, the magical girls switched out with 4 of the librarians and used the power of anime to deal with their foe, as they're using it against one empowered by that same power. They had a purpose again, to defeat a villain. That villain was a nihilistic, washed-up fixer that sought to make things collapse. He alternated between their powers, which they countered with their own. And they were themselves again due to leaching out their negativity and forming it into an amalgamation. It was a tough battle, but they eventually prevailed. After Tiphereth and her assistant librarians beat the out of Roland, and I suspect Tiphereth had some satisfaction from fighting him, after how he treated her. He believed that sorrow was all that was left, and he didn't want anything other than that, as it was faithful to him, even at that point. Once he snapped out of it, he admitted that it wasn't his proudest moment. Tiphereth asked if he was feeling better. He wasn't so sure. He felt a little relieved, even though he didn't feel like himself. She saw it as good for him to vent out his feelings. He apologized for calling her fake earlier. She didn't hold that against him. She's gone through numerous repeats with the memories of a dead girl. She questioned if she really was the same as Lisa. So if he was off, he's not off by much. Roland asked if she was okay with losing her old self completely. Tiphereth asked why he's so serious about that. She couldn't care less what her original self was. She didn't mind being stuck there as a librarian. She just cared about existing, which gave her worth and meaning. Roland asks if the same applies to him, one with 0 expectations. She's sure that he did. even though she's not very confident about that, even though she spoke as if she knew better. But she had faith. But she's free to... Well, he's free to believe whatever he wants, and he agrees with her on that. Much like with Angela, I doubt this is the last time that Roland will have a group therapy session. And it's probably going to be just as painful for him as it was for Angela. Okay, maybe not that painful, as she had a million years worth of experience. It'll still be pretty painful, though. Now that the power of anime has been overcome, we can move on to something more familiar and more exciting. Well, that's in the next video. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!